I'm about to show a really good video clip of an Indian Swami, I believe his name was Swami Maheshvarananda, interviewing the American intellectual Noam Chomsky, the person who I look to for a lot of political advice and sane opinions of political philosophy, and he makes a lot of good points about some of the good things that Occupy has brought, and indeed some of the crucially, critically important things that Occupy represents.
The viral growth of the Occupy movement and the public support of it is testament to the tremendous dissatisfaction with the inequities and abuses of corporate capitalism. The slogan, "We are the 99%, is resonating with many people. What is your view of the potential strength of this type of mass protest and its possibility to affect social change?
Well, the Occupy movement already has had a number of significant successes. One of them, as you say, is to kind of change the national discourse. These concerns and fears and so on were, of course, prevalent for a long time for perfectly objective reasons, having to do with changes in the socioeconomic system in the last 30 or 40 years. But they weren't crystallized very clearly until the Occupy movement put them forward. And now they're kind of common coin. So 99% and 1%, the radical equality, the farcical character of purchased elections, the corporate shenanigans that led to the current crisis and have been crushing people for a long time, the overseas wars and so on. What are the? That's one major contribution. The other one is not discussed so much, but I think it's pretty important. This is an extremely atomized society. People are alone. It's a very business-run society, and the very explicit goal of the business world is to create a social order in which the basic social unit is you and your television set, in which you're watching ads and going out to purchase commodities. And there's tremendous efforts made to, it's going on for a century and a half, to try to induce this kind of consciousness and social order. In fact, if you go back, say, 150 years, early days of the Industrial Revolution, right here in Massachusetts where it started, there was very lively press at the time, probably the period of the greatest free press in the United States, all kinds of press, ethnic, labor, anything. And the labor press, which was extremely interesting and lively and participatory, had a great many harsh criticisms of the industrial system that was being imposed, into which people were being driven. But one of the core criticisms was what 150 years ago they called the new spirit of the age. Gain wealth, forgetting all but self, which they considered, savage and inhuman, and it was being driven into their heads. Well, 150 years later, they're still trying to drive it into people's heads. Gain wealth, forgetting all but self. And now it's considered a kind of an ideal, but it's also intolerable to human beings. One effect of the Occupy movement has been simply to spontaneously create small social systems of solidarity, mutual support, cooperation, cooperative kitchens, libraries, and health services, general assemblies in which people actually interact and so on. That's something very much missing in the society. And when we talk about potential, Part of the potential would be to, first of all, maintain those bonds and associations after the tactic has outlived its usefulness, and tactics do outlive their usefulness. But after that happens, if what has been learned and internalized can be sustained and extended, that would be very important in itself. The other dimension is how much can you engage the rest of the so-called 99% in these activities, concerns, interactions, and so on. That's the next big step that has to be taken.
Many in the Occupy movement have realized that political democracy is controlled by big money. Few, however, have expressed that economic democracy is essential for a truly democratic society. The progressive utilization theory, or PROUD, advocates economic democracy to empower people and communities through cooperative management of most enterprises. Economic democracy requires that the minimum requirements of life be guaranteed to everyone, and decision-making be decentralized so people have the right to choose how their local economies are run. It's the responsibility of all levels of government to promote policies that achieve full employment. Do you think that economic democracy and local economies could move us forward?
Well, first of all, this is the traditional stand of the left. So if you go back again 150 years ago to these same newspapers I was mentioning, one of their demands was that those who work in the mills should own them and, of course, manage them. That was the slogan of the Knights of Labor, the major, huge labor organization that developed in the 19th century. European socialism was mostly, several branches, but the more left branches, if you like, were essentially the same, committed to workers' councils, community organizations, guild socialism in England was the same. I mean, this is the traditional thrust of the socialist movement. It's not understood here because, as I said again, this is a very business-run society. You're not allowed to know any of these things. So socialism is some kind of bad word, you know. Well, okay, that's what happens in a highly controlled society, a highly indoctrinated society. But these are very familiar goals, and yes, in fact, they're. You can go to the leading social philosopher in the United States, who everyone recognizes, is John Dewey, who just took this for granted. His, as he put it, unless every institution in society, industry, farming, communications, media, all of them, unless they're under popular democratic control by participation by the workforce and the community, he said, politics will just be the shadow cast over society by big business. So that's the alternative. You can't have meaningful political democracy without functioning economic democracy. And I think this is, at some level, understood by working people. It has to be brought to awareness and consciousness, but it's just below the surface. And in fact, things are happening. So some of the most interesting are around in Ohio, around the Cleveland area, Cleveland Project. There's dozens, maybe hundreds of not huge, but significant enterprises that are worker-owned, worker-managed. In some places there are the biggest worker-owned collection of conglomerate is Mondragon in the Basque Country. That's worker-owned, but not worker-managed, and it's industries, banks, schools, communities, very broad configuration. And there are various other elements of it here and there. A couple of quite good books just come out about it. One by Gar Alperovitz, America Beyond Capitalism, which is about the worker-owned enterprises that are sprouting around the country. And this could go much beyond. So, for example, just look, about a couple of years ago, the government effectively nationalized the auto industry, came pretty close to it. And there were a couple of choices. One choice, which is the choice that's reflexive in a business-run system, is to reconstitute it, hand it back to the original owners or people very much like them, and let them pursue the same course they were pursuing before. It's one possibility. That was, of course, the choice that was undertaken without discussion. But there was another choice. And if there had been a live, functioning Occupy movement at the time, it could have put that other choice onto the national agenda. It had to be much more larger and more organized than it is now, but this is only a few months after all. The other choice was to hand the auto industry over to the workers in the community and have them own and manage and run it, and have it directed to things that the country needs. There are, after all, things that we very badly need as a society. One of the most obvious is high-speed rail. The United States is just off the international spectrum in this respect, and it's a kind of a scandal. It's economically harmful and socially harmful, just humanly harmful.
Ecologically harmful.
Ecologically harmful. I mean, everything you can think of is just ridiculous. And the skilled workforce in the what's called the Rust Belt could easily be reconfigured to do that. People like Seymour Melman had been arguing for that for years. It might take some kind of federal aid, but nothing like what was, say, poured into the banks. And to make this even more ironic, at the very time that Obama was reconstituting the auto industry and handing it back to normal ownership, he was also sending his transportation secretary to Spain to get contracts for high-speed rail from the Spanish, who are way more advanced than we are, or the French, or the Germans. And here you have this industrial system sitting there, workers wanting to work, communities wanting to have their own lively work-based communities, and the country needing things badly, but they can't be put together. That's quite we have to go somewhere else, like to Spain, to get them to help us out. I mean, it's an incredible condemnation of the semi-functioning system. And that's the kind of thing that an Occupy movement, when it moves beyond this particular tactic, should be addressing. And things like that are happening all over the country. There was one right here about 2 years ago, a small but a sophisticated manufacturing enterprise, pretty successful in one of the Boston suburbs, was producing specialized equipment for aircraft. I don't remember what it was. And the multinational that owned it wanted to shut it down, maybe not making enough profit for them or something. The union, UE, pretty progressive union, and the workforce offered to buy it and run it themselves with community support. Well, the company wouldn't agree. I suspect they lost money on it, but the problem, I don't know, but I suspect just for class reasons, the idea of a worker-owned, worker-managed, successful enterprise is not appealing. Whatever the reasons, they closed it down. And so now that town doesn't have the industry in which it's partly based. Well, you know, again, with a live, progressive, activist movement that reached out to many parts of the community, that could have been salvaged. And there are things like that all over. So yes, it's the right thing to do. It's deeply ingrained in the American tradition, and it's been suppressed by the nature of a highly class-conscious business class, which is always, without stop, fighting a bitter class war. They know exactly what they're doing. It's very coordinated and controlled, and it's true everywhere, but it's especially so in the United States. Happens to be unusual in this respect. We see many consequences of it.
So Chomsky, as I've mentioned in my previous videos, belongs to the philosophical camp of anarcho-syndicalism. And in this camp, it basically says that the elites and the government are in cahoots, and they don't give a shit about the worker, which is you and me, the average person, except to make us into, exploited slaves for their monopoly system. And so what he sees as being the only feasible counteraction to that, and the only real direct democracy that will work, is syndicalism, or anarcho-syndicalism, libertarian socialism, where the people from the ground up organize together. That's the important part, where we organize together. That's what's missing in this world right now. We have no organization in our communities amongst people who are actually devoted towards solving the problems in our communities. We don't have the coordination between the NGOs and the community groups and things like that, like he was talking about, that something like Occupy really could and has already created. So that is a tremendous boon. Even amidst all of the craziness and everything else, Occupy has already given and shed the spotlight and brought this aspect out into the open, on top of highlighting all the issues and whatnot, like he mentioned. But for this video, I just wanted to highlight the focus on syndicalism that he seems to be demonstrating in this interview, and hopefully shed some light on some of the things that are actually necessary activism in order to get our country and the economy and everything working again, and in a way that puts the citizen, puts the normal person up in the forefront and not the elites. This is a monumental task. It's either now or never, and we have to solve this in such a way that this can never happen again. Otherwise, we're just going to kick the bucket down to future generations. This has to be nipped in the butt, destroyed at the root, and that is a monumental task. The Occupy movement also needs to be aware of what a monumental task that really is. It's not no small thing at all, and it's going to take a protracted, extended campaign. It's going to take lots of work. It's not going to just solve itself overnight.